Hi guys, so I know a lot of you have got children that are off of school at the moment, so I'm just going to try and help you out. We're going to use my mate Mr. Bones here, and hopefully we can help you with that sort of homeschooling as well. This might give you a bit of respite. I'm going to run through a lot of the bones of the human skeleton. Hopefully they'll find it a little bit interesting. We'll run through about what they're used for, names of them and so on like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the skull. We'll go from top to bottom. Unfortunately Mr. Bones here is slightly taller than me, I think, so he's making me look a bit silly. However, he hasn't got a brain, so he's not as intelligent. Okay, so we're going to run through the skull. So the skull is made up of many bones. Okay, so when you're younger, when you're a child, you start off with about 270 bones, and then it goes down to roughly about 206, 200 or so. Alright, so they fuse together. Alright, so some people have, say, extra bones in certain places. They can have things like extra ribs and so on like that. Okay. But in the skull, you have these different plates of the skull. It encases the brain, okay? So it's basically a protective cylinder, okay, for the brain to be in. All right, so we'll use this skull that I've got here. As you can see inside it, if we pop off the head there, all right, so you can see in this area, that's where the brain sits. And this is the intelligence center of the whole body. Okay, this is what makes you decide what you're doing all day, every day. Okay, so this is basically the control center, where the boss sits of the whole human body. Okay, so this holds memories, function, like everything that you're doing, all the movements that you're doing with your body, even your eye movements, even your breathing and so on, all comes from this center. It controls all of those things there. Okay, so this is where the brain sits, and nice hard sort of surface of the skull. It protects the brain. Okay, so that's the skull. Obviously you have many different bones that are all sort of fused together in the skull, but they also allow certain movements as well. So as you can see with Mr. Bones here, it allows him to chew food as well. He hasn't really been eating very well recently, unfortunately, but it allows him to chew food when he gets some. Okay, so it allows that to happen. You then have your neck here, so just underneath the chin, as you can see, so the mandible is the chin, alright? Just underneath there, as you can see, just behind it, you have your spine. Okay, so your spine is basically the center of your whole skeleton. Alright, so it connects all from your lower body to your upper body, and even your head, that it tries to balance on top of the rest of it. Okay, so your spine is made up of loads and loads of different bones. Okay, so it's like a building block. So you have the very top of your spine that your head sits onto, so your skull sits on top of, called your cervical spine. Okay, so this is the neck basically. So as you can see here, you've got loads and loads of different blocks that sit on top of each other, alright, and then the head and the skull eventually sits on top of them. So the very top is called your cervical spine, okay, and then you have just underneath that, so the mid part of your spine is called your thoracic spine, okay, and then you have the very bottom, so the lower back, okay, so around this sort of area here, okay, as you can see all the big white blocks there, that's called your lumbar spine. Okay, so as you can see, it's very, very mobile. Okay, so it can move in all sorts of different directions. If you're sitting here watching this now, you can try and rotate round, you can go forward, you can go backwards, you can do all sorts of different weird and wonderful movements with your spine. Okay, so really try to promote as much movement as you possibly can, because that's what it's there for. Okay, it's a really strong but very flexible structure as it moves around. All right, very important at the same time. This encases your spinal cord. So just where your brain is at the top there, you have, where your skull protects it, you have just underneath your brain what's called a spinal cord. So this basically a cord, like a rope-like structure that comes off your brain, so dangles from the bottom of your brain and goes down inside your spine all the way to the bottom here. Okay, so it's a big cord, what's called your spinal cord, that runs all the way down your spine. And your spine, even though it's very mobile, so it can move a lot, okay, and very strong, it protects your spinal cord as well. So it's very important for that. And again, that is what helps control all your muscle movements, all your organs, so you can digest food, you can breathe, your heart beats, everything like that. These things, these spinal cords and the brain controls all of that side of things. So it's why it's so firm and rigid, to try and protect those important and vital structures. Okay, so then we move down even further. You've got, just at the front here, you may be able to see your collarbone. Okay, so a lot of people call it your collarbone, but it's actually called your clavicle. Alright, so your clavicle, so this collarbone here, and it's just at the front here. You'll see this bony sort of landmark just at the very top of your chest, okay, called your collarbone, or you can call it your clavicle, which is the proper term for it. Alright, okay, so then when you move down even further, you've got this breastplate here at the front of the chest, so just in this area here, called your sternum. Alright, so just as you can see here, this white bit just in the middle of the ribs, called your sternum. As I'm going through, if you want to, you can pause the video, you can try and guess the bones as we're going through. You can try and play with mum or dad, your brother, sister, whatever you want to do. You can pause the video, try and guess the bones before I say them if you like. Alright, so we'll start again with this, so your sternum, okay? So at the front of the chest here, just where your ribs meet at the front, is your sternum, okay? So going on then to the ribs themselves, so if we come to this big cage, alright, at the front of the body here, so everyone can find their ribs, alright, so this big sort of structure around the mid part of the body, okay? So just through here, this protects all your organs, okay? So, well, not all of them, but most of them anyway, alright? So you've got your heart that sits in here, and even your lungs, okay? So these ribs, even though they look really firm and rigid, they actually move quite a lot. So when you try to take a deep breath in, like so, okay, they have to really expand, okay, and sort of contract. So they do a lot of movement, okay, as well as, again, protecting, all right, the organs that sit inside them, okay. They attach onto your thoracic spine. So as we mentioned earlier about the spine, it has different sections of it, if you remember. It's got the cervical at the top, that's the neck. Then just underneath it, where your ribs attach onto, okay, that is called your thoracic spine. So they attach onto your back, okay. So again, a lot of movement in the ribs, and for also protection as well. Okay. So as we move to the sort of shoulder, if we spin Mr. Bones around here a little bit, you can see this bone here that sits just at the back. On top of the ribs, okay? So this here, a lot of people call it their shoulder blade, but it's actually called your scapula, okay? So a lot of people call it their shoulder blade, but it's actually called your scapula, okay? So this here is actually part of the shoulder. Even though it looks like it's actually on the back, it's actually part of the shoulder complex, okay? So the shoulder, everyone can find it just up here, okay? But this joint here, even though it only feels like this little bit here is the shoulder, okay, where this bone comes up to here, all right, this part here, the scapula, is actually part of the shoulder, and it's very, very important for you to be able to move your arm up and down like this. Okay, so this bone here is one of the reasons that we are able to get so much movement with our shoulder. Okay, so that is the bone that is responsible for a lot of the shoulder movement. Okay, so your scapula at the back there. So as we go down the arm now, so another part that is responsible for the shoulder this is what a lot of people call their funny bone. And if you know why, it might be a nice and easy way of remembering it is because it's called your humerus. Okay, so it's very humorous when you hit your funny bone. Okay, so a nice and easy way to remember this bone. Okay, so that again, like I said, is responsible for a part of the shoulder. Okay, so this, as it moves in the socket here, as you can see with Mr. Bones, it has quite a lot of movement in that socket. Okay, and this even comes from where we was and evolved from swinging on trees before we evolved into humans. Okay, some humans might still like to swing on trees, maybe, but not really much anymore. Okay, as we move down, you've got these two bones here that are part of the forearm. Okay, so this sort of area here, okay, of the hand and the forearm. Okay, as you can see, all right, so these two bones here, they move well together. They sort of like rotate on each other. All right, and you may know, you may not, this one's called the radius. Okay, the radius, and the one underneath is called your ulna. Alright, so your radius sits on top, so if you have your arm out like that, okay, or even like that, okay, the one that's on top here is called your radius, and the one underneath, your ulna. Okay, so as we move even further down as well, so we've got the hand, and as you can see, it's a very complex structure. Okay, so if you get your own hand, look how much movement it's got in the hand, okay, and how many tiny little bones that's made up of. Alright, so not only has your hand got to be quite strong, okay, so when you grip onto things, alright, it's got to be quite strong, yeah, it's got to be very mobile as well, alright, so you get a lot of movement out of your hand. So if you're holding your pen in school and so on, all the fine, tiny little movements comes from your hand, all right? So, and all the power as well. So if you're playing like PE or whatever you're doing in school, a lot of the movement and the power coming from your hands to throw or catch a ball, anything like that. A lot of power has to come from the hand as well as movement. Okay, so an easy way to remember these bones in here, they're called your carpal bones. Okay, so when you get old enough, when you drive a car with your hands, okay, so you'll remember that they're called carpal bones. Okay, carpal. So when you drive a car with your hands, okay, carpal bones. So nice and easy way of remembering those. All right, and then as you move down the hand, you have your metacarpals. Okay, so metacarpals, and then at the very end, the very fingertip area, they're called your phalanges. Okay, nice word to say, phalanges. All right, so try not to spit when you say phalanges, but yeah, you can see how many little tiny bones there are responsible in hand. Okay, as well as trying to have a lot of power with mobility. Okay, so very important structure. All right. So as we go down the body, do you remember earlier I said about the lumbar spine? So the very bottom of the spine. Okay, and that sits on top of your pelvis. Okay, so this area around here is your pelvis. Okay, so these two bones here. Okay, even though they look like they're two bones, these big bones here, okay, they look like sort of big saucers or plates. They're actually made up of 3 different bones on either side. All right, so you've actually got the 3 bones, which are called your ilium. Okay, so this bone here is called your ilium. Okay, your pubic. All right, so the bone at the front here is called your pubic. Okay, and the bone at the very bottom here, okay, where you sit on, so the bone that you sort of sit on, okay, is called your ischium. All right. So your ischium, your pubic, and your ilium. All right. So they're the three bones that make up your sort of pelvis there. Okay. And then you've got one at the very back and the base of your spine. It's actually part of the spine itself. So as it comes down, you've got your sacrum. All right. So this area here. Can you see these big bones? They attach on in the middle to your sacrum. So your sacrum sits in the middle, and then your ilium and your other ilium attach onto either side of it. And your sacrum sits right in the middle there, so they connect them both, okay? But that, as you remember, like I said, is part of the spine, okay? So as the spine extends all the way down, that's part of it. And then at the very bottom, so the tailbone here, okay, we haven't got tails anymore, all right? But at the very bottom here, you've got what's called your coccyx, all right? So just underneath your sacrum, you've got your coccyx, all right? So that's, again, another extension to the spine, okay? So you can see that all the different vertebrae as they go down, so all the different building blocks of the spine, and at the very bottom, you've got these fused building blocks, okay? So each one is very mobile, they move on top of each other, okay? And they've got these sort of disky-like structures in the middle, all right? But at the very bottom, where the sacrum is, as you can see, it's all fused, so it doesn't really move, all right? So that's the very bottom of the spine and a part of the pelvis, okay? So, as we're going to sort of move down, you've got this bone here. Alright, now, can you see, look, how long this bone is? So this is the longest bone in the body. Alright, it's called your femur. Your femur. Okay, so this is actually harder than concrete. So it's very hard to break this bone. Alright, so this is part of your hip, if you can see. Alright, so on the side here, your hip is a very deep joint, okay? Allows quite a bit of movement in the hip, but nowhere near as much as the shoulder joint, okay? So you can do quite a lot of movement with your hip, but nowhere near as much range as you can with the shoulder joint. You can test it out on yourself, okay? So some of you may have very mobile hips, which is fantastic. However, the hip isn't as mobile as the shoulder joint, okay? But it's a very, very deep socket, as the socket of the shoulder, okay, is very shallow. So it allows a lot of movement in the shoulder joint, all right? But the one in the hip is very deep. It's a very deep socket, so it doesn't allow as much movement. And it's deep because it's got to be quite strong. This joint here has to take all our weight as we're standing, all right? So that's why it's quite deep. Whereas in the shoulder, it doesn't really take much weight, okay? Unless you might be carrying things or picking things up, but it doesn't really have to take the weight of the body. Whereas the hip joint, just here, it has to take the whole weight near enough of the body. So it's quite a deep joint. Okay, so that's the femur. All right, so as you can see, it goes down to the knee joint. All right, now this is the biggest joint in the body. Okay, the hip is really deep, but this is actually the biggest joint in the body. You might not think it, but your knee is actually the biggest joint in the body. Okay, now as you can see, look, it's got quite a bit of movement. All right, so into what's called flexion and extension. Okay, so as you extend the leg, all right, and as you flex the leg, so when you bend the leg, all right, as you can see, all right, so it does that sort of movement for you. All right, so the femur comes down, and then you can see, people call it the kneecap. Can you see this little bone that sits on top here? All right, so that's the kneecap. All right, also known as the patella. So this bone sits on top of there, okay, and that allows movement of the knee joint. into those movements that I described, okay? So that extension and that flexion movement, okay? So just like you would get in the elbow, flexion, yeah, and extension, all right? So in the knee, flexion and extension, all right? So they're the two movements, and that's what this kneecap, the patella, allows, all right? So that's what it's responsible for, okay? A very important bone. Even though it sort of sits there and it doesn't really look too important, it is quite important, because without that, you would not be able to do as much movement in your knee, okay? So as we go down, just like you would get in the forearm, can you see where they're quite similar now? So in the forearm here, you've got these two bones. If you remember them, what I said, they're called your radius and your ulnar, okay? So they're sort of like the lower leg, if you can see, okay? Because look, if you can see that, they're split up into two bones there as well in the lower part of the leg, okay? So, oh, we're breaking Mr. Bone's leg here, but if you can see down here, you've got the two bones, okay? Now, this bone here is your shin bone, okay? So very painful, all right, if you hit it, very, very painful, all right? Then that's because it's quite close to the surface, all right? So it's very easy to sort of hit onto this bone. And this bone here, your shin bone, is called your tibia. Alright, so this is called your tibia. Alright, and the one next to it, that's just next to it here, alright, on the more the outside. So this is Mr. Bone's left leg. Alright, so this one here on this side. Okay, so just on the outside, so around here on me, if you can see. Alright, so we've got a shin bone that runs down the front. So our tibia, that runs down the front. And then on the side here, called your fibula. Okay, so tibia and fibula, okay? Some people say fibula, okay, but it's not. It's tibia and fibula, fibula, okay? So, they're the two bones there that make up the lower part of the leg, okay? And they contribute to the knee joint, okay? The biggest joint in the body, okay? So as you move down into the ankle and the foot now, again, can you see the similarities between our hands and our arm to our leg and our foot? Yeah? So can you see how they are split into sort of two bones down the bottom of the forearm and the bottom of the leg, and then at the very ends of our legs and our hands, our arms, sorry, you've got all these bones, okay, loads of these little complex bones. And do you remember I said earlier, you drive a car with your hands, so these are called your carpals, okay? So, an easy way to remember these ones down here in the foot is that you walk on tar. So, as you may know, that people like doing road works, they put tar down on the roads, that black stuff that you see on the roads, okay? So you walk on tar with your feet, okay? So these are called your tarsals, okay? Carpals, because you drive a car with your hands. You walk on tar with your tarsals, with your feet. Okay, so all these little bones in the feet, okay, are called your tarsals, okay? And just like the hands, as you move down towards the toes, you've then got your metatarsals, okay? Just like in the hand, when you move towards the end of the fingers, you've got your metacarpals, all right? And then at the end again, do you remember that funny word I said earlier? Your phalanges. Okay, so at the very end where your toes are, alright, like Mr. Bone's little piggies here, they are called your phalanges, okay? So, nice word to say, I like saying that word anyway, but they're called your phalanges. Okay, so I think that is the majority of the bones in the human skeleton, okay? So they are for protection, okay? mobilisation as well, so they protect your organs, they allow you to be mobile, so as we talked about with the shoulder joint, it's really mobile, okay, and the thoracic cage here, so the ribs, they are for protection, as well as the skull for the brain, and the spine, which has the spinal cord in it, okay, they are also for mobilisation. They also even produce blood cells as well. So inside them, you wouldn't think it, but they produce white and red blood cells. Alright, so we may talk about white or red blood cells in a different video, so don't worry too much about those, but that's the sort of main reason for the human skeleton, okay, and that's why it's so important. Alright, so try to practice those. If you can, try to draw a picture of a skeleton. Alright, so here is my really bad attempt earlier of drawing a skeleton. So when I was drawing Mr. Bones, okay, are you ready? Because it's tragic, alright. Here we go. Alright, so can you see the resemblance from Mr. Bones here on this bit of paper to Mr. Bones there as he stands up? It's not very good, is it, to be fair, let's face it. But what I want you to try and do is try to draw the human skeleton as best as you possibly can. Get your different colouring pencils or pens out. Try and find a bit of paper. I know this bit of paper here is quite big, okay, but you don't need a really big bit of paper. Just a normal size bit of paper is absolutely fine, and you can try to draw your best skeleton and try to label the different bones as you go through. Okay, so as we talked about with the different bones, I want you to try to draw the skeleton and try to label all the different bones, okay, and any sort of like little tips that you remember me saying. So like the carpals, you drive with a car, alright, and the tarsals, you walk on tar, okay, so things like that. Or even if you're talking about the skull, say what it protects, and the spine as well, what it protects, and so on like that. Alright, so try your best to do that. That should keep you quiet for a little while anyway. Alright, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers, bye.